Hello, my name is Natalie Oliver. I'm 84 years old and I'm going to share a story that changed my life forever. Before I start, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how my stories reach so many different places. It was July 1968. I remember it like it was yesterday. That winter in Sao Paulo was especially cold that year. I was 27 years old with two young daughters, Mary Ann, who was 6, and Julia, who was just 4, and a house we had bought with so much sacrifice in the Braz neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion, but it was our home built brick by brick with the money my husband Albert and I had saved. Albert was a charming man, the kind everyone admired. Tall, always well dressed, with a smile that could light up any room. We met in 1960 at a church fair. It was love at first sight, at least for me. We got married just 6 months later, despite my family's objections. They thought I was rushing into it. "Natalie, you barely know this man," my mother said. "But that's what love is, isn't it? It makes us deaf to advice." Albert had a small restaurant on Jose Paulino Street. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was enough to support us and give us a comfortable life. I helped as much as I could, splitting my time between the restaurant and taking care of our little daughters. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. every day to prepare fresh pasta for lunch, while Albert handled shopping and serving customers. At that time, I also sewed to bring in extra income. I had learned from my grandmother when I was 8, and I'd do small repairs and alterations for neighbors. I never imagined that skill would one day be my lifeline. The restaurant was doing well, so well that Albert started spending more and more time away, saying he needed to visit suppliers, markets, and meet with potential investors. I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? He was my partner, the father of my children, the man who promised to love and respect me till death do us part. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, my world came crashing down. Albert had left early as usual, saying he was going to check on a new shipment of imported wines from Italy. The girls were at school, so I took the chance to go to the bank to deposit the money I'd earned from sewing that week. When I got there, I realized I had forgotten my savings book at home. I hurried back, knowing the bank would close in an hour. As I entered the house, I heard something strange coming from our bedroom. A woman's laugh, followed by Albert's voice. My heart raced like never before. I quietly climbed the stairs, each step feeling unbearably heavy. The bedroom door was slightly open, and what I saw through that crack changed my life forever. Albert was on our bed, the same bed where our daughters had been conceived, with Eleanor, their piano teacher. I will never forget the scene. Her red hair spread out on my pillow, Albert's hands roaming over the body of the woman who came to my house every Thursday to teach my daughters Chopin and Mozart. I was frozen, as if someone had dumped a bucket of cold water on me. I didn't cause a scene, didn't scream, didn't cry. I quietly went back down the stairs just as silently as I had gone up. I left the house and headed to the bank just as I had planned. Only this time, instead of depositing the money, I withdrew the little we had in our joint account, just 120 cruzados, a meager amount considering what we would need to start over. When I got back home, Albert had already left, and so had the teacher, as if nothing had happened. During dinner, he talked excitedly about the wines he had bought and how they'd attract more customers to the restaurant. I just smiled and nodded while something inside me was dying and something new was beginning to grow. In the following days, I made a point of acting normal. I kept waking up early, preparing the dough, taking care of the girls, but I started paying closer attention to the details. That's how I found out Albert wasn't just cheating on me with Eleanor, he was also stealing money from the restaurant. Accounting had never been my strong suit, but even I could tell something was wrong with the numbers. The income didn't match what we saw every day at the business. The expenses were much higher than they should have been. Albert was draining our little business penny by penny. One night, while he was sound asleep, I found a bank statement in his jacket pocket. Albert had a separate account at another bank where he regularly deposited significant amounts. In 6 months, he had accumulated over 3 zeros worth of cruzeiros, money that should have been in our business, in our savings for our daughter's future. In the weeks that followed, I quietly continued my investigation. I discovered that Albert had rented an apartment downtown where he met with Eleanor. Even worse, he was planning to run away with her to Rio de Janeiro, where he intended to open a new restaurant using our money I had also helped earn through so much sacrifice. His plan was simple and cruel: to leave me with the debts, the mortgage payments, and 2 young children to raise. Without professional qualifications and no experience beyond that restaurant, I would be utterly helpless. He counted on that so I wouldn't have the strength to look for him or demand anything. That night, lying next to the man who planned to ruin me, I made the decision that would change the course of my story. I would not be the victim in this story. I would be the heroine of my own life. Making a decision is just the first step. The hardest part is finding the strength to follow through when every path seems impossible. But as my grandmother always said, when life closes a door, Natália, it doesn't open a window. It waits for you to build your own path. The morning after that discovery, I woke up early as always. I made breakfast for the girls, got them ready for school, and took them there with the same smile as always. No one could have guessed the storm raging inside me. It was essential to keep up appearances while I laid out my plan. When Albert left for the restaurant, I sprang into action. First, I went to the room we used as storage and opened the old wooden chest where I kept leftover fabrics from my sewing projects. At the bottom, there was a cigar box that had belonged to my father. Inside, I stored the 120 cruzeiros I had withdrawn from the bank the day before. It was very little, but it would be a start. Then I sat down at the Singer sewing machine my grandmother had given me when I got married. It was an old relic that Albert always wanted to sell, saying it took up too much space in the living room. I looked at that machine, remembering how my grandmother had saved for years to buy it. "This machine will feed generations," she used to say. Little did she know how right she was. That very day, I went to Mrs. Carmen's house, my neighbor who worked as a housekeeper at a luxury hotel downtown. For months, she had been asking me to alter her uniforms, but I never had the time between the restaurant and the kids. "Mrs. Carmen, do you still need those alterations?" I asked, feeling a tightness in my chest. It was the first time I took work outside our family circle. "Natália, of course I do. And look, the other girls at the hotel have been asking if I know anyone who sews. The new uniforms that arrived are way too big." That's how it all began. That very afternoon, I altered 3 uniforms while Albert thought I was at the market buying ingredients for the restaurant. By the next week, I already had 8 pieces to adjust. Within a month, I was sewing for almost all the female staff at the big São Paulo hotel. I needed an excuse to get out of the house more often, so I started saying I was helping my cousin Teresa prepare for her daughter's wedding. Albert never cared much for my family, so he didn't ask questions. And Teresa, when she found out about my situation months later, confirmed my story without hesitation. The solidarity among women is something men like Albert will never understand. The money I earned was small, but it was all mine. Every cruzeiro went into that cigar box, which soon became too small. I started hiding the money inside an empty flour jar at the back of the pantry. Albert hated cooking and never rummaged around there, but I needed that money desperately, especially if I wanted to begin a new life with my daughters. Then came an opportunity that would change everything. Mrs. Olivia, the hotel owner's wife, was looking for someone to make her daughter's graduation dress. The seamstresses she knew were charging a fortune, and she wanted to save money. "Natália, do you think you could make a party dress?" Mrs. Carmen asked one October afternoon. At that moment, I hesitated. Making adjustments was one thing, but creating an entire dress was something completely different. Yet desperation makes us courageous. "Of course I can," I replied with a confidence that barely matched how I truly felt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sketched various designs until dawn, inspired by the fashion magazines I had secretly bought. When Mrs. Olivia came to see me 3 days later, she chose the most elaborate design, a navy satin dress with French lace details. The fabric would be provided by her, which was a relief since I couldn't afford to buy anything at that moment. "How much do you charge, Natália?" she asked, an elegant middle-aged woman. I had no idea what a fair price would be. If I charged too much, I'd lose the opportunity. If I charged too little, I'd be working almost for free. I remembered that the seamstress downtown had asked for 350 cruzeiros. No, 300 cruceros, Mrs. Olivia? I said, holding my breath. To my surprise, she didn't debate. She simply nodded and handed me an envelope with half the amount as a deposit. I had never seen so much money at once. I need the dress in 3 weeks. The graduation is on November 15th. Working on that dress while managing all my other responsibilities was the biggest challenge of my life up to that point. I woke up at 4 a.m. to sew before the girls, and Albert woke up. Then I went through my usual routine at the restaurant. At night, when everyone was asleep, I returned to the sewing machine. To hide it, I draped a sheet over the mannequin I had improvised with newspapers and tape. If Albert asked, I'd say it was just a big alteration I was making for a client. With each fitting, Mrs. Olivia grew more excited. At the final fitting a week before graduation, tears filled her eyes when she saw her daughter in my creation. "Natalia, this is a work of art," she whispered, gripping my hands tightly. On the day of final delivery, Mrs. Olivia not only paid me the remaining 150 cruceros, but also gave me a 50 cruceros tip, a whole month's worth of what I earned adjusting uniforms. "You have a gift, Natalia. All my friends will want to know who made this dress." And so it was. By December 1968, I already had orders for 6 party dresses. I worked in secret, always at times when Albert was out or asleep. My daughters sensed that something was going on, but they believed the story that I was helping other women as a favor, not as a job. By January 1969, my flower jar already held almost 1,000 cruzados. It was a significant amount of money, but still not enough to start over with 2 small children. Albert continued with his escape plan. I noticed he was gradually selling off the restaurant equipment, replacing it with cheaper, lower quality items. The restaurant's business was also declining, as the quality of the food had changed. One night, while searching through Albert's pockets as he took a shower, I found a note from Eleanor. "My love, I've already bought the tickets to Rio. On March 15th, we will finally be free. I can't wait for us to start our life together at the new restaurant." March 15th. I had just over 2 months to finalize my plan. I needed to hurry. That was when I made my riskiest decision yet. I approached Mrs. Olivia and confessed that I needed help. I didn't mention the betrayal. I only said I was saving money to open my own workshop but needed a place to work. In the meantime, the back room of my house has been empty since my mother passed away, Mrs. Olivia said. "You can use it as a temporary workshop until you find your own space. In exchange, I want a discount on the dresses for my 50th birthday." That's how, in February 1969, I started bringing my sewing machine to Mrs. Olivia's house every day, telling Albert I was helping organize a big party. There I could work undisturbed for several hours while my daughters were at school. In the afternoon, I'd pick up the girls, come back home, and return to my role as a devoted wife. The orders grew every week. Lucy's graduation dress, Mrs. Olivia's daughter, had been a complete success. Now it wasn't just the hotel staff seeking me out, but also the guests and Mrs. Olivia's friends, women from São Paulo's high society, who paid without hesitation for my services. March 1st, 1969. 2 weeks remained until Albert's planned departure. My flower jar now held 2 600 cruzado notes. It wasn't a fortune, but it would be enough for the first few months while I set up my own business. The plan was almost complete. I wouldn't just be abandoned, I would be the one to leave first. They say the best revenge is to live well. But I discovered something better. Living well while your betrayer watches your success from afar, unable to take part in it. The second week of March 1969 was the most intense of my life up until then. As Albert finalized his plans for escape, I was also finalizing mine. The difference was that he didn't know about my plans while I was aware of every detail of his. On March 10th, a rainy Monday, I woke up early as usual. I made breakfast for the family and got the girls ready for school. When Albert left for the restaurant, I started putting into motion what I had planned for months. First, I went to the bank and opened an account in my name. I deposited almost all the money I had saved, keeping just enough for the next few weeks. Next, I visited 3 rental properties. The third one was perfect, a small storefront on Augusta Street, not far from the hotel where Mrs. Olivia lived. It had a back room that would serve as a sewing workshop and a small space I could turn into a bedroom for the girls on days they needed to stay with me after school. "I need the contract by today," I told the landlord, a Portuguese man with bushy eyebrows. "And I'd like to keep the business quiet for now. It's a surprise for my family." He seemed suspicious, but when I showed him the money for the first month's rent plus the deposit, his doubts disappeared. I signed the contract as Natalie Oliver, dropping my married surname. It was the first official document I had signed this way since 1960. I felt a mix of fear and freedom I had never experienced before. The next day, I began moving my things into the new space. First the sewing machine, then the fabric's threads, needles, and other supplies. Everything was done gradually to avoid suspicion. Albert was so caught up in his own plans that he barely noticed my longer absences. Mrs. Olivia and some of her friends helped me by buying the materials I needed to set up the studio. Chairs, a cutting table, a fitting screen, and most importantly, a professional dress form. Until then, I had been working with an improvised dress form made of papier-mâché and duct tape. It felt like a craftsman receiving their first quality brush after years of painting with their fingers. On March 13th, everything was ready. My little studio had a modest charm, yet was professional. In the display window, I placed the blue dress I had made for Lucy, who kindly lent it to me for the exhibition. Next to it, a simple sign read, "Atelier Natália Haute Couture." I know it was ambitious. I hadn't studied in Paris or learned from famous masters. But by then, I already understood that part of success comes from the confidence we show. March 14th, the day before Albert's planned escape, was the hardest. I went home after setting everything up in the studio and acted as normally as I could. I prepared his favorite dinner, roast beef with potatoes, got the girls ready for bed, and even put on the perfume he liked. I wanted his last night at home to be memorable, though for reasons he could never imagine. While he slept, I packed our bags, just the essentials. Clothes, documents, a few photos, and their favorite toys. I wrote him a letter and left it on the kitchen table. It wasn't a letter of goodbye or anger. It was simply a notice that I knew everything and wouldn't be there when he came back from work the next day. The night was long. I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at Albert's face, trying to understand how someone I once loved so deeply could betray me so deliberately. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a cold determination to move forward. On the morning of March 15th, Albert left early as usual. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving, as if it were just another ordinary day. "I'll be back for lunch," he said, knowing it was a lie. His bags were already hidden in the car, which was parked a few blocks away. As soon as the door closed, I woke the girls. "Today we're going to do something different," I explained as I helped them get dressed. "Mom has a surprise for you." The kids were excited about the idea of a surprise, but also puzzled when I started packing several of their clothes into suitcases. "Are we going to travel, Mom?" Julia asked, rubbing her sleepy little eyes. "In a way, yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're moving to a new house where you and Marianne will have more space to play." It wasn't easy to explain to children aged 5 and 7 that we were leaving our home without Dad. I chose to share only the essentials, that Dad had to travel for work for a long time, and that we would have our own place in the meantime. The full explanation would come gradually, as they could understand better. At 9 a.m., a taxi pulled up in front of our house. I loaded the suitcases into the trunk, helped the girls get in, and took one last look at the house where I had lived for almost a decade. I felt no sadness, only a strange sense of relief. "Where to, ma'am?" the taxi driver asked. 728 Augusta Street, I replied, the address of my new studio and the small apartment in the back that will be our temporary home. When we arrived, the girls were amazed by the studio. To them, it looked like a princess shop with colorful fabrics, delicate laces, and the shimmering blue dress in the window. "Are you going to make dresses like that, Mom?" Marianne asked, pressing her little fingers against the glass of the display. "Yes, sweetheart. This will be Mom's new job." The first few days were the hardest. The girls missed their dad, the house, and the toys we left behind. I worked from dawn until late at night, taking advantage of the time they slept in the little room I set up at the back of the studio. A week after we moved, I got a visit from Teresa, my cousin. She brought news about Albert. He came home that same day, Natália, she told me. He freaked out when he found out you and the girls had left. He even went to the police station, but when the officer asked where he'd been all day, he realized he couldn't tell the truth without incriminating himself. Now he's telling everyone that you abandoned him and took his daughters. I didn't care about the rumors. Albert would soon find out he had bigger problems. The restaurant was drowning in debts he had hidden from me, and now without the piano teacher, who apparently had abandoned him after discovering the debts, he was completely alone. Meanwhile, my little studio was beginning to come alive. The first official client was Mrs. Olivia, who ordered a dress for her 50th birthday. After that, her friends came, guests from the hotel, and the staff who had previously only asked me for minor alterations. By April 1969, just a month after opening, I already had enough orders to keep me busy for the next 2 months. The turning point came in June, when the governor's daughter happened to walk into my studio. She had seen the blue dress in the window and was captivated. She wanted something similar for an engagement party. The dress I made for her was featured in the society section of the newspaper, with a small note mentioning it was crafted at the exclusive Natália atelier. From that moment on, clients began arriving from all corners of the city. I had to hire 2 assistants still in 1969. Lucy, a woman who had worked for decades in a fabric factory, and Clara, a 17-year-old apprentice with a natural talent for embroidery. In December of that same year, I rented the space next to the studio to expand. The girls were already adjusting to their new lives. I enrolled them in a nearby private school where they could stay full-time while I worked. At night, we would sit together in the small kitchen of our makeshift apartment, and they would tell me about their day. It was Mary Ann, my eldest daughter, who one day asked me, "Mom, why doesn't Daddy ever come to visit us?" It was a question I knew would come someday, but it still hurt to hear. "Your dad is living in another city now, sweetheart. He has a new job there," I replied, choosing a half-truth. I didn't want my daughters to grow up resenting their father, even if he deserved it. The truth was that Albert had tried to reach out to me, not out of love or concern for the girls, but because the restaurant had completely failed. He had lost everything to creditors and was now working as a waiter in a rundown downtown restaurant. Eleanor, the piano teacher, had disappeared with the little money he had left. By 1970, my atelier was already well known throughout São Paulo. I started participating in local fashion shows, showcasing my creations to an ever-growing audience. The girls, now 8 and 7 years old, loved watching the shows and seeing the dresses their mother had made walking down makeshift runways in clubs and hotels around the city. It was also that year that I took the most important step. I bought a small townhouse on Alameda Santos to be our permanent home. It was the first property in my name, purchased with the money I had earned myself. The day I received the keys to that house was one of the happiest days of my life. Success brought not only material comfort, but also a confidence I had never known before. I was no longer the shy Natália who accepted any treatment out of fear of being alone. I was a businesswoman respected and admired, raising my daughters with dignity and pride. And so piece by piece, stitch by stitch, I built not only a successful workshop, but a new life. A life where I was the protagonist, not the supporting character. A life that no one could take away from me because it had been built with my own hands. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars remain to remind us of how strong we are. And sometimes the past returns to test us, to see if we still have that strength that once saved us. The year 1973 was significant for me. My workshop was no longer just a small shop on Rua Augusta. It now occupied an entire building on Oscar Freire, the most elegant street in São Paulo. Atelier Natália had transformed into Maison Natália, with 3 floors dedicated to haute couture. On the ground floor were ready-to-wear dresses for parties and special occasions. The first floor was reserved for clients seeking exclusive pieces. On the second floor was the bridal section, which had become our specialty. I no longer sewed alone. I had a team of 20 seamstresses, all personally trained by me. Every piece that left Maison Natália passed through my final approval before being delivered. My name had become synonymous with quality and elegance. Mary Ann, my eldest daughter, was 11 years old and already interested in the business. On afternoons after school, she would sit beside me and watch as I sketched new designs. Julia, at 9 years old, preferred music and took piano lessons 3 times a week. Irony of fate, considering how it all began. We lived in a spacious house in Jardim Europa, one of the most upscale neighborhoods in the city. Gone were the days when we shared a small room at the back of the first studio. The girls each had their own rooms, decorated to their tastes. We had a housekeeper who took care of the home and a nanny who helped with the children whenever I needed to stay late at the Maison. Financially, I had exceeded any expectations I might have had when I left home that March morning in 1969. The Maison Natália was a commercial success, dressing the most influential women in São Paulo society. I had invested in real estate, including the building where the Maison was located. At 32, I was a successful businesswoman, respected in my field. As for Albert, I rarely thought of him. From the few updates that reached me, I knew he had tried to open another restaurant after the first one failed, but that had also failed. After that, he worked in various places as a waiter or cook, never staying long in any job. The girls would occasionally ask about him, and I always responded with half-truths, saying he was traveling for work or living in another city. It was a rainy Tuesday in May 1973 when the past came knocking at my door. I was in my office on the first floor of the Maison reviewing sketches for the winter collection when Lucy, my oldest assistant, entered with a worried expression. "Mrs. Natalia, there's a man downstairs insisting on speaking with you. He says it's urgent." "Does he have an appointment?" I asked without taking my eyes off the sketches. "No, ma'am. He says he's your husband." I felt as if the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. My pencil paused mid-stroke, leaving an uneven mark on the sketch I was carefully working on. I took a deep breath before responding. "Tell him I'm busy, please." Lucy hesitated but nodded and left. 5 minutes later, she returned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, Natalia, but he refuses to leave. He says he'll stay in the lobby all day if he has to. He seems a bit agitated." I looked out the window of my office, which faced the street. The rain was falling steadily, forming small puddles on the asphalt. Suddenly, the scared girl I once was wanted to hide to escape through the back door, but the woman I've become knew some battles had to be faced. "It's all right, Lucy, let her in." In the minutes that followed, I fixed my hair, applied red lipstick, and adjusted my posture in the chair. When the door opened again, I was sitting behind my large mahogany desk, hands folded over a folder of drawings, like a queen on her throne. Albert entered like a ghost from the past. He looked thinner, his hair thinning and graying at the temples. He wore a worn-out suit that had definitely seen better days. His eyes, once bright and confident, now seemed dull and lost. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but I quickly pushed it aside. He had made his choices. "Natalia," he said in a hoarse voice, you look beautiful." "What do you want, Albert?" I asked directly, without offering a seat or any other sign of hospitality. He averted his gaze, embarrassed. "I'm going through tough times, Natalia. I lost my last job 3 months ago and can't find anything. No one wants to hire a man my age without references." His age? He was only 38. It wasn't age holding him back from finding work, but his reputation for irresponsibility and the debts he left behind. "And what does that have to do with me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I thought, well, you have this huge business now. "Everyone's talking about Momo, Natalia. I hoped you might help me with a loan just until I get back on my feet." "A loan?" I repeated the word slowly, as if tasting something strange and potentially poisonous. "Yes, I promise. I'll pay it all back as soon as I get a decent job. Or maybe you could give me a job here. I can be useful, Natalia. I can handle the finances, the bills, the suppliers, just like you handled the accounts at our restaurant." I interrupted, feeling the old anger rising again, recalling how he siphoned money into his secret account while planning to leave me with 2 small children. He turned pale. "You knew?" "I knew everything, Albert, from the start. About Eleanor, the downtown apartment, the tickets to the river, the money you stole from the restaurant, everything." He collapsed into a chair in front of my desk without waiting for an invitation. His face was a mask of defeat. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you confront me?" I smiled faintly without joy, because you gave me the greatest gift I could receive, the motivation to change my life. If I had yelled at you, made a scene, maybe we would still be together, unhappy with you betraying me and me pretending not to know. Instead, I chose to build something better for myself and for our daughters. Our daughters, he repeated, clutching the words like a castaway clings to a piece of wood. How are they? Marianne must be so grown up now. And Julia, does she still fear thunder? They're great. They're smart, well-mannered, and happy girls. And no, Julia isn't afraid of thunder anymore. She plays the piano now, did you know? She's very talented. A heavy silence fell over us. Outside the window, the sky had darkened even more, and the rain was now coming down in thick sheets. Occasional lightning lit up the office, followed by distant thunder. "Can I see them?" he finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. That was the question I dreaded. The girls had a right to know their father no matter how undeserving he was, but they also had a right to a stable childhood, free from the inconsistent presence of a man who knew when to walk away. "They think you're living in another city, working," I replied after a moment. "If you want to see them, you have to be consistent. No more showing up once and then disappearing for months. They've already suffered enough abandonment." "I didn't abandon them," he protested. "Wasn't it you who left home, taking them with you? And why did I leave, Albert?" "Because you were already packed and ready to run off with your mistress, leaving us drowning in debts." He had no answer. He lowered his head, defeated once again. "How much?" I asked after another silence. "What? How much do you need for this loan?" His eyes lit up briefly. 2,000 cruzados would be enough to help me start over, rent a decent room, buy better clothes for interviews. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out my checkbook. I wrote the amount, signed it, and tore off the page, placing it on the desk between us. "This is your final settlement, Albert. With this money, I'm buying your permanent absence. Don't come back here. Don't look for the girls. Don't tell anyone he was my husband or the father of my daughters." He looked at the check, then at me, his face full of shock. "But this is way more than I asked for." The check was for 20,000 cruzeros, 10 times the amount he had initially requested. "Consider the difference, the price of your dignity. You're giving up your rights as a father, an ex-husband, as anything you ever were to me or to them. This money is so you can disappear from our lives forever." His hands trembled as he took the check. "You can't do this, Natália. I'm their father. I have rights." "What rights, Albert?" "The same rights you used when you decided to abandon them? Or maybe the rights you exercised when you spent the money meant for their care on your mistress?" He slipped the check into the inner pocket of his worn suit, still shaking. "You've become tough, Natália." "No, Albert. I've just become strong, and honestly, I have you to thank for that." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. He stood too, suddenly looking much older than his 38 years. "When they're older," he said at the door, "will you tell them the truth? That you love them in your own imperfect way?" "Yes, one day I will tell them that you chose another woman and another restaurant over them. Maybe. It will depend on how much they need to know to move forward with their lives." He nodded slowly, as if taking in every word. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "You won, Natália. You built all this from scratch. You raised our daughters alone. You won." I waited until I heard the elevator doors close before allowing myself to sink back into my chair. No tears came, just a strange sense of closure, as if a long and painful chapter had finally ended. That night when I got home, I hugged my daughters tighter than usual. Looking at their innocent faces full of promise, I vowed never to let Albert or any other man hurt us again. The sweetest revenge wasn't the money I had or the success of my business. It was the independence I gained, my ability to protect my daughters, and the future I could offer them that no one could ever take away. And so as the rain continued falling outside, washing over the city and bringing the scent of wet earth through the open windows, I closed the final chapter of my story with Albert and prepared to write the next chapters of my life, this time entirely on my own terms. Some victories in life are quiet, built day by day, stitch by stitch, decision by decision. And sometimes fate has a peculiar sense of humor, bringing back those who hurt us just to see how much we've grown without them. The 1970s unfolded like a perfectly tailored dress that fits the body just right. Natália expanded beyond São Paulo. In 1975, I opened a branch in Rio de Janeiro, right in the heart of Ipanema. In 1977, another one in Brasilia, serving the wives of politicians and diplomats. Each new store was a milestone in the journey I started with just a Singer sewing machine and 2 little daughters to raise. The girls grew up beautifully. Mary Ann, at 15, was already showing impressive business talent. She accompanied me on trips to Europe to buy fabrics, learning about contract suppliers and managing a team. Julia, at 13, was a promising pianist, winning junior competitions and captivating everyone with her musical sensitivity. They were opposites in character. Mary Ann, practical and ambitious, much like I had become. Julia, dreamy and artistic, but inseparable as sisters. After Albert's visit in 1973, I never heard from him directly again. I found out through acquaintances that he had used the money I gave him to open a small bar on the coast of Santos. The business lasted less than a year before failing, like all the others. After that, information about him grew scarce, as if he had become an ever-dimmer shadow in my past. My personal life stayed focused on my daughters and my business. There were suitors, of course, businessmen, doctors, even an influential politician. But something inside me had closed off to the idea of sharing my life with a man again. I had learned the value of independence the hard way and wasn't willing to risk losing it. It was in 1979 that fate prepared its most ironic twist. Natália was already a fashion empire, with 5 stores across Brazil and plans for an international branch in Paris. I had just purchased a historic mansion on Avenida Paulista to serve as the new company headquarters, with space for a studio, showroom, and administrative offices. During the building's renovation, I visited almost daily to supervise the work. On one of those visits, I noticed a middle-aged man among the workers carrying heavy materials back and forth. There was something familiar about his profile and the way he walked, but I couldn't immediately place him. It was the engineer in charge who, unknowingly, revealed the man's identity. "Albert, watch out for those beams, man. They're expensive," he called out to the worker. I froze when the man turned around. Even beneath the layer of construction dust, with his scruffy beard and a baseball cap shading part of his face, I recognized him instantly. Albert, my ex-husband, the man who had planned to leave me with 2 young children, the man whose betrayal had unintentionally given me the strength to build everything I now had. He didn't see me that day. I was on the mansion's upper floor watching the workers in the inner courtyard carrying materials. For a moment I considered leaving without saying a word, pretending I hadn't recognized him. It would have been easier, cleaner to keep the past buried where it belonged. But something inside me needed that final closure. Maybe it was the hurt girl I once was. Maybe it was the proud woman I had become. I called the engineer to my makeshift office on site. "That worker, Albert, when was he hired?" I asked casually, pretending to review some documents. "About 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Natália. We needed extra hands to finish the work on time. Why? Is there a problem with him?" The engineer replied. "No, none," I said. "He just seems familiar." "What's his full name?" I asked. "Albert Silva Menezes," the engineer said, checking his clipboard. "Want me to call him over?" he offered. "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "I just want you to move him to a different position." "A different position, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes. Starting tomorrow, I want him to be responsible for cleaning this floor, where my office will be. Just this floor, every day. Yeah?" The engineer looked confused but nodded. "As you wish, Mrs. Natália." The next day, I arrived early at the construction site. I settled into the room that would be my future office, a spacious space with windows overlooking the mansion's inner garden. I laid out the renovation plans on the table, along with some catalogs of imported fabrics and my notes for the upcoming collection, then waited. Shortly after 8 a.m., I heard a hesitant knock on the door. "Come in," I said, without lifting my eyes from the papers before me. The door opened slowly, and even without looking, I sensed his presence. It was as if the air in the room shifted subtly, heavy with the weight of old memories, past hurts, and decisions that had changed the course of our lives. "Good morning, ma'am. I came to do the cleaning," said the voice that once promised me eternal love. I slowly lifted my eyes and met his gaze. Recognition lit up his face, quickly followed by a frightening pallor. He seemed to have aged 20 years, not just 10. His hair was completely gray, deep wrinkles framed his eyes, and calloused hands gripped a mop and a bucket of water. "Natália," he whispered, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. "Hello, Albert," I replied calmly. "What a coincidence to run into you like this." He stayed by the door, frozen in time and space. The mop trembled slightly in his hands. You own all this?" "Yes. Miss Natália is expanding. This will be our new headquarters." He swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the impressive room and the documents on the table, looking at me, now an elegant 38-year-old executive, far from the frightened young woman he once knew. "I didn't know," he started. "If I had known it was your company, I would never have accepted the job," I answered. "Why?" "It's an honest job. There's nothing to be ashamed of." He lowered his eyes, a blush creeping across his face. "You can start with the floor," I instructed. "Then the windows. I want everything perfect." Over the next hour, Albert cleaned the floor on his knees while I worked on my designs, made phone calls, and met with the engineer to discuss construction details. It was surreal to see him there, the man who once planned to leave me in ruin, now cleaning the floor of the empire I built. When he finished the floor, he got up with difficulty. I noticed he was limping slightly on his right leg. "An accident," he explained, noticing my gaze. "At work, 3 years ago. It never fully healed." I nodded without replying. He resumed cleaning the windows, working silently. It was only when he was nearly done that I spoke again. "How did you end up here, Albert? I thought you were managing that bar in Santos." He stopped. The cleaning cloth paused mid-air. "It went under, like everything I tried after our restaurant. Seems I don't have the business instinct you do." "It's not about having a special instinct," I said. "It's about persistence, getting up every day and pushing forward even when it feels impossible." He turned to me, his eyes misty. "The girls, how are they?" "They're doing well. Marianne is finishing high school and plans to study business in Paris. Julia is a talented pianist. She's already won national competitions." "Paris, our Marianne in Paris," he whispered. "Do they know about me?" I hesitated for a moment. "They know the essentials, that their father and I separated when they were little, that he went his own way while I built a new life for us." "You didn't tell them what I was going to do?" "No, I didn't want them to hate their father." Tears ran down his weathered face. "You've become a woman better than I ever deserved, Natália." "This has nothing to do with you, Albert," I replied calmly. "It's about them, about what's best for our daughters." He wiped his tears away with the backs of his rough hands. Do you think I could meet them someday, even just once? I won't tell them who I am if you don't want me to." I thought about the question for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say no. I wanted to shield the girls from any hurt his return might cause. But another part, the part that had grown and matured over the years, knew they had the right to make their own choices. "I'll ask them," I finally said. "They're almost adults now. They can decide for themselves if they want to meet you." A fragile hope lit up his tired eyes. "Thank you, Natália. That's more than I deserve. Keep working here," he said, changing the subject. "Do a good job. If you need a reference when the project's done, I'll talk to the engineer." He sounded surprised. "You're not going to fire me after all this?" "Why would I? Just because one day you wanted to walk away. Look at us now, Albert. Look at where everyone has ended up. Do you think I still hold a grudge?" In truth, what I felt wasn't exactly forgiveness. It was something different, closer to compassionate indifference, like someone looking at an old scar and barely remembering the pain it once caused. In the following months, Albert kept working on the renovation. Every day he cleaned my office, sometimes changed light bulbs and fixed little things. Always polite, always looking down when I was around. The other employees noticed the strange deference he showed me, but no one dared to ask. I talked to Marianne and Julia about their father's return. As I expected, Marianne, being practical, showed little interest. "He had 10 years to find us, Mom. Why now?" Julia, more sentimental, was curious. "He looks like me. I carry something of his." We arranged a casual meeting, lunch at a quiet restaurant. I explained to them that they didn't have to decide anything that day, just meet him as an old family acquaintance. Albert arrived nervous, wearing what was clearly his best suit. Still, it was too modest for the restaurant I'd chosen. The lunch was polite but awkward. Albert desperately tried to impress, telling exaggerated stories about his adventures after we left Sao Paulo. The girls were polite but reserved. Marianne, especially, watched him with critical eyes that mirrored my own. Julia smiled more, delighted to discover that Albert also loved music. At the end of the meeting, when Albert went to the bathroom, Marianne squeezed my hand under the table. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "For what, dear?" "For being strong for both of us, for not staying with him." Those words meant more than any revenge I could have imagined. My daughter's recognition, the deep understanding that my tough decisions were the right ones, the certainty that the path I chose, no matter how hard, led us to a better place than we would ever have reached if I had stayed in that marriage. The construction of the new Emon headquarters was completed in December 1979. At the inauguration party, with French champagne, a live orchestra, and Sao Paulo's high society in attendance, I spotted Albert among the workers helping serve the trays. Our eyes briefly met across the room. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that felt both like a greeting and an apology. I responded with a quick nod, not friendly, not hostile, just an acknowledgement of our shared past and the very different lives we had built since then. That night, as I watched my daughters animatedly chatting with the guests, I thought about the extraordinary journey I had taken since that March morning in 1969, when I left home with only 2 suitcases and a fierce determination to survive. Not only did I survive, but I thrived. I turned betrayal into resolve, abandonment into independence, and pain into creative strength. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing Albert cleaning the floor of my office, although I have to admit there was a certain poetic justice in that scene. The real revenge was the full life I built, the empire I created from nothing, the wonderful daughters I raised on my own, and the hundreds of women I employed over the years in my stores. The true revenge was discovering through adversity the strength that had always been inside me, just waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. And now, at 84 years old, looking back on this long life filled with challenges and accomplishments, I can say with certainty, sometimes what seems like the end of everything is just the beginning of something extraordinary. All it takes is the courage to take the first step, to turn pain into determination, to weave a new story stitch by stitch. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't making others suffer. It's showing how you flourished despite the pain they caused you. It's using betrayal as a springboard to reach heights you never imagined. It's becoming such a powerful version of yourself that when you finally encounter those who hurt you, the only feeling you have is gratitude for being pushed to discover your own strength. That's the story I share with you today. Not as a fairy tale, but as proof that we are far stronger than we realize, that we can start over from scratch, and that a determined woman with a sewing machine and a dream can build an empire not just of fabrics and threads, but of dignity, independence, and self-love. My dears, if you enjoyed my story, please don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time. Yeah.